Hello and welcome to my game pitch for my potential platformer game, Gravvers. So without further ado, let's just get straight into it. Gravvers is about a person saving the world from a to-be-decided apocalypse with the help of a gravity switching device. Gravvers will feature a weapon wielded by the player which will allow them to shoot projectiles at enemies and certain obstacles to make them float to the ceiling for a short period of time before coming back down. Gravvers will be a puzzle platformer game with a slow and methodical pace as you grind through the levels. I want to give the game a pixel-based theme with dark colors, as I'll explain a little later. I'd like to include numerous boss fights, which I've already thought of one or two, and interesting interactions between the player and objects in the game world. The game will be easy to begin with to help ease new players into the genre, and will then ramp up the difficulty for veteran players later in the game. So, in case this high concept that I'm showing you here doesn't give you a picture of what I want Gravvers to be, let me go into a little more detail starting now. What is Gravvers? So, as I mentioned before, Gravvers will be a single-player puzzle platformer game with a heavy focus on physics-based puzzles. The main thing that makes Gravvers what it is the existence of the gravity device the player is wielding, which will fire projectiles to switch gravity of whatever they hit for a short period of time, which will send them up to the ceiling and then come back down to the floor. So, I guess, why is Gravvers? Gravvers is a game that I've been wanting to make for a little while, as I'm a large fan of platformer games and puzzle games, particularly games like Super Meat Boy and The End is Nigh. But I haven't seen anything like what I want Gravvers to be. While there are gravity-based platformers out there, they focus on the player switching their own gravity to complete the level. Now, I feel like the concept of Gravvers has a lot of potential for in-depth puzzles and creating multiple ways around a level. Like, for example, if there's an enemy there, you could shoot them with the gravity device to make them float up for a short time and then you can get away from them. Or if you want a more permanent solution, you could shoot an obstacle up and then time it correctly for the enemy to be below the obstacle when it falls down, and you can just squish them. Also, I'd like to see a bit more variety from the games I'd mentioned before, where everything is just all super duper fast paced and a complete death fest just to get to the end. So the quote unquote narrative. Like others of the genre, Gravvers won't be heavily story-based, but it will still feature like a bare-bones narrative just with the purpose of giving a bit of meaning to what the player is actually doing. Mechanics and gameplay will be coming first with this project, but I have been thinking of ideas for a basic story just to base the game around, and the only one that's kind of stuck with me during this time was the one I've gotten written here on the slide. So in this world, being a Gravver is simply a job, like think a really high-class electrician or something like that. And these are the only people authorized to use these gravity devices, as they're essential to fixing things in their line of work. Some kind of apocalypse, I'm not sure what, is happening, and the player gets news that all of the Gravvers that are left must get down to the center of the Earth in order to stop what's happening. So the player has to navigate their way through the city that's like on fire and in ruins at the moment from all the panic they live in, and make their way down to the caves and slowly get towards the center of the Earth, where a final boss battle will occur, and that'll be the end of that. Like I mentioned before, it's not anything super in-depth, but just something to kind of keep the player moving along with the gameplay, and to give a reason for the sudden change in backdrop and scenery throughout the game, so it's not all just the same bland image on the backdrop. So I want Gravvers to be a slow to plan but fast to act style of game. Probably the best way I can explain that is to compare it to something like Portal, where you can see the entire puzzle and have as much time as you want to plan your course of action, but once you get going, things will start going rather quickly. But something I do like about games like Super Meat Boy and The End is Nigh is the instantaneous respawns on death, which don't disturb the flow of the game and allow the player to just get straight back into the action uninterrupted. So that's a mechanic that I do want to be putting into Gravvers from those games. Gravvers will be geared towards platformer puzzle players, both new and veteran alike. I wanted to have a simple mechanic so it's easy to pick up for players who are new to the genre, but towards the end the difficulty will ramp up with your skill to give even long-time platformer players a challenge. Gravvers will be available on all major gaming platforms except for mobile and VR, so it'll be on PC, PS4, Xbox One, and the Switch. Basically anywhere that the controls for the game make sense, it'll be available to play there. As I touched on in the high concept slide earlier, I want Gravvers to have a pixel art style with a very dark color scheme. The dark color scheme will work side by side with the narrative I mentioned just to help give the game a little bit more flavor. The pixel graphics that you see on screen are from a game called Zombie Night Terror, which is like a Lemmings sort of a game where you just control a big zombie horde and try to infect all the humans across various levels. Excuse me. I really love this style of pixel art and feel it would fit really well with both the mechanics of Gravvers and the very shallow story that goes with it. So finally I'm going to touch again upon what makes Gravvers different from what's already on the market. The two major platformers out there at the moment are Edmund McMillan's Super Meat Boy and The End Is Nigh, like I've been talking about a bunch during this slide. The main attraction to these games is a very high difficulty curve and challenging gameplay. While Gravvers will have challenging gameplay, I aim to gradually expose players to that rather than just throw the player into the deep end like the previously mentioned titles do so well. Also, as a platformer itself, Gravvers will have a much larger focus on solving puzzles and the switch of gravity, rather than focus on timing your movement and doing pixel perfect jumps, which are the main attraction of games like Super Meat Boy and The End Is Nigh. Also, like I said before, the mechanic of switching gravity for NPCs and obstacles isn't one that I've found very commonly, and if it is used, generally it's accompanied with the ability for the players to switch their own gravity, which isn't present in Gravvers. So, yeah, that's it for my game pitch. If you have any questions about the game, feel free to direct them towards future me in class when this presentation is over. So, cheers.